Thanks, James. I'll try and sort of speak as loudly as possible. What I'd like to do this evening is just share some of the experiences I've had in building Destra, and I want to talk about some of the good stuff that's happened, and I also want to talk about some of the maybe not so good stuff like Opus Prime and stuff like, you know, corporate taking over the company that you started. So they're the kinds of things that I want to share with you. But just maybe by way of background, you know, I guess all entrepreneurs kind of started this way. You know, I started at the age of 5 selling postcards at the front of my house, and back then it was 1 postcard for 1 cent or 3 postcards for 2 cents. And my core objective wasn't about internal rate of return or return on investment. It was how many lollies I could buy when I sold my postcards. I kind of progressed from there. You know, sort of moved away from postcards into, you know, train sets and stuffed toys, all the kind of stuff you do when you're a little kid, and just went on from there. And sort of to when I finished high school, you know, I went to university for a whole 6 weeks. I was going to actually become an accountant, and I thought that would just be completely, well, that's just not me, that's boring, so I technically dropped out. And so technically I'm a dropout. But I actually do want to talk about the MEI, which I know quite a number of people here have actually done before. So we kind of had this vision. We were getting involved in software in 94, 95 and the internet in 95, 96, so well before the sort of Internet Explorer browser. And towards the late 90s, I mean, when we were sort of, you know, young, we were kind of like, it was really hand to mouth. There would have been at least half a dozen times that we nearly went broke. All my credit cards were maxed out most of the time. I can see a bunch of entrepreneurs nodding, yeah, we know the feeling. And my advice there is just get more credit cards, because you never know. And so sort of towards the late 90s, we saw this term MP3 really increasing in the engines, and I'm sure we all know what MP3 is in terms of the file format, but it started becoming you know, effectively the de facto standard for music. And we brought some guys on board to help us with the process. We always had this view that we're going to list, and I remember walking into one of the offices, which was actually my parents' house that we effectively kicked them out and converted into an office. And you know, and I used to even sleep on a little shelf because we sort of had to make room for the staff. And I sort of walked into this room and spoke to our developers and said, we're going to go public. And one of the guys turned around and said, Domenic, how can we go public? You're still operating out of your parents' bedroom. And so, with a hell of a lot of work, tapping into a bunch of networks, we ended up listing. We ended up raising $16.8 million in May 2000, and this is where sometimes timing can work.
Testing.
So this is where timing can work in your favour. We closed our issue. This is how lucky we were, and I actually believe that sometimes you create your own luck. We closed our issue on Friday Aussie time, Friday US time, which is Saturday morning our time. The US market crashed. So we literally got in by, you know, the skin of our teeth. Someone upstairs must have been saying, let these guys go through, and because they got something to do. So once we listed the company at a discount as you did, in that particular market. How do we, 1, 2, testing?
No.
Almost there. At that particular market, if you can't get it working, 1, 2, don't worry about it.
It's working in the back.
Okay.
It's great at the back.
All right, fantastic. We basically listed mp3.com.au, and our business model revolved around 2 core things. 1, getting content from the record companies, and 2, the online advertising market. So if you looked at all the stats, and you know there was all this research coming out, you know, the markets were just going to go like hockey stick approach to both markets. When we listed, that was completely the reverse. 1, the record companies decided actually they weren't going to provide content out to anyone, because you may remember back then they were too busy suing Napster, and the online advertising market that had been growing at almost 100% per annum halved overnight because it was all the .coms spending money and they were going broke. So we basically were at a point where we either continue down the digital path and effectively go broke, or we had to change our strategy. And so, as one of my mentors says, Neville, who's actually sitting down here, he basically said, we're going to set ourselves a big, fat, hairy, audacious goal. Now we're getting feedback. We were always running a very small web hosting company.
Just turn it off.
I'll leave that with you. We're always running a really small web hosting company, and back then we were about the 37th largest hosting company. There was Web Central as #1, and there was no other clear leader. There was, if you know much about hosting, it was very much mum and pop style operation. And Neville said, we've got to set ourselves a big, fat, hairy, audacious goal to become one of the top 3. Also following Jack Welch from GE, he basically said, you're either going to be one of the top 3 in any market or get out. And so we said, we want to become one of the top 3. And so through a series of acquisitions, we made 17 acquisitions, quite aggressive organic growth, we ended up building the 2nd largest hosting company in Australia, which a couple of years ago we sold for $19 million, mainly in cash. What that then did was gave us the cash to invest back into our digital media dream, because our heart and soul was always in digital media. And so our first acquisition was in December 2005. If I sort of fast forward to up until recently, we made over 14 acquisitions. We built, once again following the approach of building something that's in the top 3 of its market. We built the largest independent media and entertainment company in Australia with well over $100 million of revenue. We had Lachlan Murdoch and Paul Ramsey that joined the register. So from that perspective, everything was going great. Up until then. Then, once again, big, fat, hairy, audacious goal. We launched a takeover bid for Magna Pacific, a company that we were capped at 40 mil, they were capped at 50 mil. We were in competition with a $1 billion company called Lionsgate. Not sure if you followed it in the press. Through a series of 3 months, we actually completed that acquisition. So we bought a company that was bigger than us. Then we thought, okay, we've done it once, we can do it again. Then what we did, there was a little company called, not so little, they're actually a lot bigger than us, called Beyond International. You may not have heard the public company. Mythbusters was one of their products. And so we basically, there was a couple of private equity firms that were basically vying for this business. And for us at Destra, it made so much sense that we wanted this company. And so what we did one morning, there was, in the public company world, if there's a takeover bid by one company, but you go in there and buy 10.1%, you basically scuttle their bid. So one morning we basically went into the market, did a hostile raid, and got 10.1% by lunchtime, which basically stopped everyone else in their tracks. So another fantastic thing, it was all going well. Then what we did, we needed to raise capital. We got our bank funding in place by St. George. They were going to provide us $40 million in cash. We needed $20 million of fresh equity. We went into the marketplace to raise this money. We saw 30 institutions over that week. By Friday, we had commitments for just over $20 million of that cash. On December the 17th, a day I remember very, very clearly, we placed our company into a trading hold. December 17th, Centro came out and basically said they got this big hole in their balance sheet. They kind of forgot about $400 million off the balance sheet, and the Australian market tanked 4.5%. All the investors we spoke to basically slammed the door in our face and said, actually come back next year. So we were so close, and yet we were so far in relation to that acquisition. Fast forward to March 2008, Opus Prime. I had all of my shares with Opus Prime. You may ask, why, Dominic? Why did you have all your shares with Opus Prime? Why? I asked myself the same question. Well, okay. Well, there's actually a good logical reason for that. I, like 1,200 investors, particularly in the small cap space, had our shares with Opus Prime because we could borrow against them and use our shares as collateral to to buy more Destra shares and to exercise all of our options. Because people think that when you go and IPO a company, that's the exit. However, when you're CEO of a public company, you can't actually in fact sell your shares. I mean, you can, but what would you think if you're an investor in the company and the founder CEO was selling his or her shares?